Hey everyone, Dr. Crayhay here. So this is a lecture for Chapter 3. In this lecture I'll focus on interrogating claims using the 4 validities. To get the most from this lecture, I recommend that you review or make sure that you're comfortable with the following 3 things. So you need to have a pretty good understanding of what variables are by this point in time. Remember our 3 claims, so we have frequency, association, and causal. Make sure that you remember what those are and you can distinguish between them. And then the types of associations. So remember, we can have negative associations, positive associations, and no associations. So if you don't have a good handle on those things yet, go ahead and hit pause, jump over to those videos, or pull out your textbook and do a quick review. So in everyday life, we are presented with 3 different kinds of claims, and in research as well. We have frequency claims, association claims, and causal claims. By now you should have the skills to identify, the type of claim, but how do you evaluate the quality of those claims? In this lecture we'll talk about some different kinds of validities and which validities are appropriate for each type of claim. So here we have 4 different kinds of validity. We have construct, external, statistical, and internal. So before I even start to explain these things, let me tell you, these are difficult concepts, and it's something that you will struggle with definitely throughout this course, and probably throughout your studies in psychology, particularly if you go into graduate school. So we're going to focus on really getting a basic understanding right now, and then as you go on in your studies, you should start to get deeper and deeper into these topics. So starting with construct validity, so how well the variables in a study are measured or manipulated. So how well are they constructed, in other words. So say that I claim a certain percentage of teenagers text and drive. First of all, how am I determining that? How am I defining texting? How am I measuring that? Am I measuring it through self-report? Are the teenagers telling me? Am I somehow putting apps on teenagers' phones that show me, when they get above a certain miles per hour, they were actually using their phone? How am I measuring that texting activity? That would get to construct validity. External validity is the ability to generalize to a population. So the idea here in psychology, we can't study every single person, right? It's just not feasible time-wise, money, resources, all of those kinds of things. We simply cannot ask every single person or measure every single person. So what we end up doing is we take what's called a sample. So maybe we take 10,000 Americans. And then we want to say that those 10,000 Americans are representative of people in the United States in general. So that would be generalizability, and that speaks to the external validity. So the extent to which the results of a study generalize to some larger population. We have statistical validity. This addresses the strength of an effect and its statistical significance. So really you want to look at the size of the effect and how well these statistics were carried out. To really get a good handle on statistical validity, quite honestly, you will need to take an entire semester-long course in statistics. It's just a complicated concept. Numbers scare people. So just know that statistical validity has to do with the strength of an effect, direction of an effect, and then the statistical significance. And again, if you end up taking statistics, we will elaborate on that there. Finally, we have internal validity. So in this textbook, we're talking about internal validity as basically getting rid of confounds. So we'll talk about confounds later in the semester, but basically we're claiming to have a relationship between one thing and another thing, right? So maybe we say there's a relationship between drowning and ice cream sales, which this is true, actually. So are we saying that one causes the other? Are we saying that ice cream sales cause drowning? I don't know. That seems kind of weird, right? So the issue here is that there's another variable. So the variable is heat or temperature or weather, however you want to name it. It's actually causing both of them, right? So it gets hotter outside, people start to swim more, they buy more ice cream. So it's not that the sale of ice cream is causing drowning, it's that the temperature is. So that's dealing with the internal validity. So your study is trying to claim that A causes B. Well, how well did they control for those other things like temperature? Did they measure them? Did they consider them? Did they include them? So that's a brief introduction to these four kinds of validity. Hopefully that gives you a good overview. But again, your textbook does cover this in much more detail, and we'll continue our discussion throughout the course. So here we have a nice figure with all of the validities here and just kind of the really basic main point of each. So again, we have construct validity, quality of the measures and manipulations. How were they measured? Were they measured well? Statistical validity. Are the statistical conclusions appropriate? Are they reasonable? Again, we'll touch on that a little bit in this course, but in Intro to Statistics, you'll get much more on that topic. Internal validity. So there are no alternative causal explanations for the outcome. So you're looking at two variables. Is there a third that could have caused this? Is there a third that could have influenced this relationship? Have you appropriately considered those other variables? External validities. To whom, what, or where can we generalize? So, we took a sample of college undergraduates and now we're saying they are representative of the United States population as a whole. Is this appropriate? Can we do this? What was the sample? What are they trying to generalize to? Is this appropriate? So those are the questions to ask for external validity. So I wanted to draw your attention to Table 3.5 in your textbook, Interrogating the Three Types of Claims, using the Big Four validities. So this table is really great because it gives you example questions to ask. So based on what kind of claim is it, we have frequency, association, causal, depending on what kind of validity I'm looking at, what kinds of questions should I be asking? What kinds of things should I be thinking about? So all of this information is right here for you in Table 3.5. I would, fold over a corner of this page, put a bookmark in this page, however you remember it, because you'll want to come back to this, particularly in your discussion section, so that'll be towards the end of the term, but when you have to talk about the limitations of your study, so your term project, you're going to want to consider your different validities. Particularly, and jot this down somewhere in your notes, I want you to address the generalizability of your findings. And so I'll include some nudges to that in the instructions, but this table is going to be a great resource as you evaluate, as you interrogate the three types of claims in your personal life and also for our research project. Let's spend some time and break this down by the type of claim and give you some example questions and kind of talk about what validities to prioritize. So you won't address every single kind of validity for every kind of claim, so we'll prioritize some over others. Also, it's important to keep in mind it is really difficult to have all four kinds of validity in every single study that you run. Sometimes you have to prioritize generalizability over maybe statistical validity. Maybe you just can't, for whatever reason, get that kind of validity in your study, and so you talk about that in your discussion section when you're talking about your limitations. So keep that in mind as we go through this. Let's say we have a frequency claim. So I think I read one the other day saying something like 60% of teens consider suicide, something like that. So say that we have this claim. The first question we want to know, construct validity of the variable. How well was the variable measured? First of all, the variable is considering suicide, right? So how did they get at that number? Did they go ask the teens if they have ever considered it. When they asked the teens, did they ask them face to face in an interview? Did they do it through a survey? Was their name associated with that survey? Did they do it through a phone survey? Did they do it through a Facebook poll? So all of those things will affect the construct validity. People have a tendency to, they'll be slightly more honest typically when they can be ensured anonymity. So if they have to answer face to face with someone, they might be more likely to lie a little bit. So how they measured the variable is really important to consider. External validity. So can we generalize from the sample to the population? So they're claiming that, 60%, 65, whatever I said, percent of teens are considering suicide. Did they go to their friends on Facebook and ask? Did they go to a local high school and ask? Did they do a nationally representative survey? So where they get their sample is very important. Statistical validity. How large is the margin of error? So usually they'll say 65% plus or minus 3% or something like that. So the larger that margin of error, the less confident you should be in those results. You also have to ask, did they even include this margin of error? Oftentimes they don't. So say that we have an association claim. So we claim that there is a relationship between Facebook use and depression. So this has been making the rounds on my social media sites lately. You've probably seen it as well. So we're making a claim between two variables, so Facebook use and depression. So questions we have to ask: construct validity. How well was each variable measured? How did they define Facebook use? Does this mean simply having a Facebook account? Does this mean spending 2 minutes a day on Facebook? An hour a day? 5 hours a day? 10 hours a day? What does it mean to use Facebook? What about depression? Did they do behavioral observations? So did they follow the people around and do a checklist? Did they do a questionnaire? Did they do a depression survey? How did they measure those variables? What's the construct validity here? What about the statistical validity? So we'll talk about correlations later in the semester, but what if the correlation is really small? What if it's really big? Was it statistically significant? So a zero correlation, so R equals 0, means no relationship. The strongest association correlation you can have here would be a 1.00. It can be either positive or negative. So if you say that there is a correlation between Facebook use and depression of 0.99, that is really strong. If you say that it is 0.01, that's not very strong at all, and I'm not going to believe your claim. So you have to ask, how strong is the association? Is it statistically significant to get at statistical validity? And then our good friend, external validity. Can we generalize? So we're saying that there is a relationship between Facebook and depression. What was our sample? How did we go about getting those people? Was it teenagers? Did it include adults? Was it young children? Was it across all ages? What was the size of that sample? Was it 5 people? Was it 500,000 people? So all of those questions are important to determine the external validity. Turning to causal claims, let's use a typical psychology example, and say something like Prozac causes a reduction in depression symptoms. So we're saying that our drug improves or decreases the symptoms of depression here. So we need to know the construct validity of both of our variables. So one variable is Prozac. We have another variable that is depression symptoms. So the independent variable would be Prozac. So maybe we have two separate groups. Some people come in, we flip a coin, heads they get Prozac, tails they get nothing. Maybe instead of comparing against nothing, we compare against exercise, or we compare against a different depression drug. So you want to know not only how is it manipulated, but what are they comparing against. The dependent variable, again, is a measure of depression symptoms. How did they measure that? Was it self-report? Did they do some kind of behavioral measures. How did they go about that? Where is that information coming from? Statistically, statistical validity. So how big is the difference? How big is that relationship? So you're saying that it causes a reduction. How much of a reduction, right? Is it meaningful? Does it mean that these people can now get out of bed and go to work? Or are they still in bed, they just report feeling better? So how big is that difference, and is it statistically significant? Our friend, external validity. Can we generalize? So again, this one is really difficult to get to with causal claims. Causal claims should be experimental, so that means we have two groups. We have a drug group and no drug group, and we want to see how it influences the dependent variable, which in this case is depression. So it's hard to prioritize external validity. It's definitely taken into account, so you'll probably get a random sample of people. You want them to be representative of the general population, all of those kinds of things, but it's usually a low priority here. But can we generalize this effect? We have to consider the sample. Internal validity is the priority with causal claims. So again, we're saying that our drug causes improvements in depression. Was it something else? What if these people were also on anxiety medication? What if they also started some kind of exercise routine while they were in your study? What if they started eating better? What if a million things could be going on that could be causing that improvement other than just the drug, particularly if you're comparing against nothing. So you're giving some people a drug and the other people just continue what they're doing. So you have to consider what else could have explained this effect. Was that taken into account by the researchers? So keeping in mind that not every study can always satisfy all four validities, I want to give you a few things, a few questions to always ask yourself, and a few to avoid. So we want to say things like, the question is the study valid? There are a few problems with this, first and foremost being we don't know what kind of validity you're talking about. Did it not have construct validity, external validity, statistical validity, internal validity? None of them? Did it have all of them, two of them, three of them? The question is too broad. So instead of saying things like that, practice and work on saying, how's the construct validity? Is external validity relevant here? So ask about the specific validity and ask specific questions there. Instead of saying things like, that is not a valid study, ask these more specific questions. Can the study support a causal claim? What kinds of priorities, what kind of validities were prioritized here? So just a general kind of caution and a call to action, really, to start practicing getting more specific in your questions as you learn these things. So we often want to say the study's not valid and just dismiss it, but we have to remember there are 4 different kinds, and it may not satisfy all of them, but it has probably satisfied at least one. So by asking these more specific questions, we get more information.